Hello everyone and welcome to Connect with Evie. My name is Evelyn and I'm your source for tips and tricks about every secret nook and cranny in Objectif Lune's flagship product. In today's video, we are taking a look at snippets in the Connect Designer. I know that we covered snippets in the basic course, but there's a couple of things that I wanted to show you on top of the things that we've already learned. But let's start with a little bit of a recap in regards to snippets. Now, snippets are a file, an HTML file that you can insert into your document in one or more of the contexts. And the snippet can be modified and it will affect all of the different contexts. The snippet can be called dynamically, and this is what we're going to take a look at today. Different ways of modifying the snippets and calling them and using it dynamically within Designer. So let's start by creating a couple of paragraphs of random text. And I'm also going to add, let's say, one or two little things here just to make it variable. So if I go into preview, then this works. And I'm also going to make it bold right here. And I'm going to add a small bit of a header right here. So when you have text directly inside of Designer, you can very easily select that text and create a snippet with it. Now, there are two different ways of creating the snippet. One is to just create it, which will copy the contents of the file into a snippet and leave the text as is on the page. The other way is the create shared content, and this will remove the content and transfer it into a snippet, leaving only a reference to the snippet itself on the page. So let's do that because this is pretty much the best way to do it. I'm going to create shared content. And if I look at the source code of the actual page, what you can see here is that all I'm left with is an article tag, an article element that calls the snippet directly. Now, if I create a new context here, I'm going to create a new web context, for example. Doesn't really matter. They work in all of them. When I drag my snippet directly onto the page, I still have the same option. If I uncheck this option, it'll just copy the snippet into it. And if I insert as shared content, it's going to make a duplication. So if I look at the source here, I have the same thing. So the shared snippet, the shared content, the advantage of it is if I change this into a header, because this is what I would want, and I go back into my print section, then it's changed here. If I delete one paragraph that I have that's too much, then again, I go back in the web and this paragraph is removed. The content is synchronized between all instances of the snippet wherever they are. And you can even add snippet to the master page, so basically wherever. Now, another way to edit a snippet is to double-click on it, and when you open it, you have a full editor here, and this also gives you the ability. So if I take this paragraph and italicize it, and I go back, save it actually, and I go back, then it's also saved here. This is the same basic contents. So the next thing I want to show you is how to load the snippets dynamically using a script. Now, unfortunately, it's not as simple as creating a text script and changing the source attribute inside of the article. This is not loaded in this way. We do have a script function in the API, which is called load HTML, and this is what we are going to use to load this snippet directly in. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to change or create the snippets that I'm going to use in the dynamic script. The data file that I loaded here is actually kind of limited. The only thing that I can really see that I can kind of use is the gender at the top. So we're going to use this in order to change or load these snippets dynamically. So let's say I call this text Mr. and I will duplicate this and call it text Miss. And I'm going to do, hello, my good sir. And in Miss, I'm going to do, hello, Miss. And now, of course, what I need to do is to modify my script here. I'm going to start by doing just text Mr. to show you that it continues to work with the appropriate file name. And the next thing we need to do is to actually make it dynamic. So in JavaScript, what we use to make things variable is to do string concatenation, which is using a plus sign. And we can mix static text like snippet/text and variables such as record.fields.gender, which has to be in the appropriate case. So if I do this and I click on OK and I switch to Miss, we are using a dynamic snippet and this works fine. I could do a bunch of differences just to show you and add different variable images to it, but the point is dynamic snippets such as this are fairly easy. The other thing I want to show you in terms of dynamic snippets is the use of the selector in the load HTML. Now, load HTML itself, if I looked at the documentation, would show me that it takes two different parameters. The first one is the actual HTML file, and the second one is a selector. And the selector is any CSS type selector, which means elements, classes, IDs, etc. And it's going to load this specific selector instead of the whole HTML file. So if I do H1 here, because I know I have a first header, and I apply, I'm going to get only the header of the HTML file. So if, for example, you had one HTML file with all of your location addresses, and this matched something in the data file. So for each province you have, or for each area, each zone, each country, whatever it is, you have a location which is the closest location to the client, then those could be simply put inside one large HTML file and loaded using the selector by doing, for example, record.fields.location, and that would work fine. It's a small example, but it's the kind of power that you have. Now, the last thing I want to show you is the ability to load these files from external locations. Why is this super useful? And it is very, very useful. Is that if your HTML files, so let's say your translation, your localized files, or design files, or product information, that is all generated by the marketing, the web design, or whatever. So these HTML files are provided to you, and they are updated and modified regularly by this either a system or a person. Then you might not want to have to reload those files into Designer and resend the file to workflow for automation purposes, for example. Well, you can load them using a file path. So the first thing I'm going to do is to save these files directly to a specific location. I'm going to create a file or folder called Snippets, and I'm going to put the HTML files right here, delete them from my document, and I'm going to have to call them dynamically. Now, to know what to put here exactly, there's a how-to on learn.objectiflune.com. If you look in the how-tos, it's called Internal, External, and Web Resources, and read through that, and you will have an idea of how to use this. In my case, what I want is simply the exact path, and I'm going to do file / and then my path. However, because Windows and JavaScript sometimes don't mix together, this should actually be forward slashes. I'm just going to change that. And on file, C users, and I believe that needs to be a space like this. Then it shows, it removes the error, and if I click on OK, it goes back to loading the snippet. Removing the selector shows that I get the whole complete snippet. And if I edit this in, let's say, Notepad++, and I remove the my, just to show you, I save that, and I go back to, and it removes the my. So modifying HTML files outside of Connect will work fine here. So this trick will give you a bit of an idea of the awesome things you can do with snippets. Load them dynamically, load them from a local folder, load them from the network, that works fine. Load them from a URL, also works really well. Of course, will be a bit slower, but it works still. So this is the power and extensibility of snippets. And that's it for today. That's it for today's Connect with Evie. I hope you learned something new today. Remember, if you have any questions, comments, feedback, or something you want me to talk about in a video, don't hesitate to comment below or tweet me at Connect with Evie, or send me an email if you have it. And as always, see you in a few clicks.